Hi, welcome for tonight's class, and for tonight's lesson, we will learn about historical foundation of curriculum and of course under the course of PED 104, the teaching and the school curriculum. I am Jason Hora, your narrator for this lesson, and the group 4 members are the following: Celso Julian, Quinones Jonaline, Palacio Ira May, Garcia Murphy, Ebo Jinky, and last, Cuevas Remilgin. Before we proceed to historical foundation of the curriculum, we have to know first what is really curriculum development or what does it mean. Alright, so according to Purita Bilbao et al., curriculum development is defined as the process of selecting, organizing, executing, and evaluating learning experiences on the basis of needs, abilities, and interests of learners and the nature of the society and the community they belong. So alright, so you have to take note this. So the first process is to select. What does it mean? So means the selection of content in line with the goals and objectives of the curriculum, like selecting suitable instructional strategy goals. And then you have to organize what you have been selected and execute on what you have been organized and then evaluate what has been executed in order for us to validate the strong curriculum. As what I said, talking about the process, it includes the processes that are used in determining the needs of the learners, and then it also develops the aims and objectives for the program to answer those needs and of course to determine the appropriate syllabus or course structure, the teaching method, the teaching materials to be used in the teaching and learning process. Exploring the historical foundations of curriculum can promote a sense of freedom and encourage educational reform. Reviewing the history of education allow us to step outside of here and now, gaining a bigger picture and seeing ourselves within it, realizing that the field of education must remain dynamic in order to be effective. Throughout history, curricular choices have been made out of necessity and meet the specific needs of society at that time. Also, it is through history that we see how predominant philosophies have defined a society's values, which in turn determine the current purposes of education. We learn that programs are considered pioneering due to different philosophies to which others subscribe. In reviewing history, it becomes apparent that this had been the case throughout the centuries. Ideas can change and a group can break free of faulty suppositions. History shows that what is now isn't necessarily what needs to remain. Now maybe another question would come to your mind: why do we need this curriculum development? Why do we need to change our curriculum every now and then? Or what are the motives of curriculum development? Well, curriculum development founded in 5 motives. We have the first one, the religion. Religion would always affect the curriculum because in education in the curriculum there is this reflection of the religious belief of this particular country or particular group of the learners. Next to that is the political. Whoever in that position would always affect the educational system, would always affect in how we organize our curriculum. The third one, we have this utilitarian reason. We revise the curriculum. We need to develop curriculum for practically purposes or for functionally purposes that responds to the economic needs for rationality purposes. So, for the mass education, education is for all. So that's why we have this development of the curriculum because we want everybody to experience. We want everybody to have meaningful experience of the curriculum. The last one is for the excellence in education. We are doing a lot of revision because curriculum constantly evolving because we want to achieve this excellence in education. We want to be part of the other countries for us to compete in the global market. We are constantly doing, constantly developing, constantly upgrading the curriculum in order for us to attain the excellence in education. So, in attaining the excellence of education, we have to know where we begin. We have to know our foundation for us to understand what is the present. So, kailangan nating pag-aralan ang kasaysayan upang maintindihan natin kung ano ang nangyayari sa kasalukuyan. So why do we need to study historical foundation of curriculum? Because it reflects the educational focus prevalent or present during period in the Philippine history. And the focus could be basis or model for curriculum development of the recent years. Again, we have to know our foundation for us to really understand what we are having in this present time. To start with, let us welcome our curriculum theorists and how they view curriculum from a historical perspective. The following are the theories that created impact in our curriculum development. We have here Franklin Bobbitt, Weret Charters, William Kilpatrick, Harold Rugg, Hollis Caswell, and Ralph Tyler. Now, let us distinguish on how they view curriculum. Franklin Babbitt, 1876 to 1956. Franklin Babbitt is a professor of educational administration at University of Chicago. He played a leading role during the first three decades of 20th century in establishing curriculum as a field of specialization within the discipline of education. He was born in English, Indiana, a community of less than 1,000 people in the southeast part of the state. Babbitt earned his undergraduate degree at Indiana University. He went to teach in several rural schools in Indiana and later at the Philippine Normal School in Manila. After receiving his doctorate at Clark University in 1909, he joined the faculty of University of Chicago, where he remained until his retirement in 1941. As a part of his university duties, Babbitt periodically undertook surveys of local school system in which he assessed the district's operation, particularly the adequacy of their curricula. His most famous surveys were 1914, the evaluation of San Antonio Public Schools, and a 1922 study of Los Angeles City Schools curriculum. Babbitt is best known for his two books, The Curriculum in 1918 and How to Make a Curriculum in 1924. In these volumes and his other writings, he developed a theory of curriculum development, borrowed from the principles of scientific management which the engineer Frederick Winslow Taylor had articulated earlier in the century in his efforts to render American industry more efficient. The key principle for Taylor was the task idea, the notion that each worker should be given a narrowly defined production assignment that he was to perform at a specific rate, using a certain predefined procedures. It was the responsibility of emerging profession of efficiency experts to identify these precise steps. The procedures for curriculum planning, which Babbitt referred to as job analysis, were adapted from Taylor's work and began with the identification of the specific activities that adults undertook in fulfilling their various occupational, citizenship, family, and other social roles. Franklin Babbitt viewed curriculum as a science that emphasizes students' needs and prepares students for adult life, and also objectives with corresponding activities should be grouped and sequenced. Babbitt noted that it compromised the school experiences that educators constructed to enable children to attain these objectives. Some of these, according to him, were general in nature and represented the knowledge that all children needed to prepare for their responsibilities as adult citizens. It would provide students with large group consciousness necessary for them to act together for the common good. Other objectives, however, were more specific and constituted the skills that youth needed to prepare for the array of specialized occupation that adults held in modern society. The curriculum that Babbitt advocated included elements for general education for all youth, but was for the most part differentiated into a number of very specialized vocational tracks. Babbitt believed that schools should assign children to this specialized curricular track on the basis of assessment of their intellectual abilities, which foretold their ultimate destinies in life. Weret Charters, 1875 to 1952. Charters is a professor and director of the Bureau of Educational Research at Ohio State University. He contributed to the fields of curriculum development and audiovisual technology. Charters served as a faculty member and dean at 6 institutions. So after a 3-year career in Canadian public schools as a teacher and principal, Charters spent the remainder of his career in United States. The 6th institution that Charters served as faculty and dean was the State Normal School in Winona, Minnesota, the University of Missouri, the University of Illinois, the Carnegie Institution for Technology, the University of Pittsburgh, and the University of Chicago. In 1923, Charters was awarded an honorary doctorate from McMaster University. Charters also view curriculum as a science that gives emphasis on students' needs. And listing of objectives with activities ensure that the subject matter is related to object. And lastly, subject matter and activities are planned by the teacher. Charter's most significant contribution to the field of curriculum development came in the form of his activity analysis approach to curriculum construction. Activity analysis essentially involved specification of the discrete tasks or activities involved in any social activity. For purposes of curriculum construction, the resulting specification translated into program objectives. Activity analysis was considered a scientific approach to curriculum construction insofar as it is represented a quantification of human activities as basis for selecting educational objectives. Because activity analysis often amounted to little more than an accounting of tasks, critics of the approach characterized it as scientism in curriculum work and rejected it as overly mechanistic. William Kilpatrick, 1871 to 1965. Kilpatrick is a prominent educator of the early to mid-20th century. He was a colleague of John Dewey and a proponent of Dewey educational model. Kilpatrick's contribution to education was not only a supporter of Dewey's work, but also in his expansion of the work of Dewey. Kilpatrick supported Dewey's view of getting away from rote memorization and a rigid curriculum and replacing it with a child-centered approach. He was a major critic of the Committee of Ten with their emphasis on acquiring knowledge through traditional means. Kilpatrick saw school not only fulfilling an intellectual purpose but also a social one. William Kilpatrick viewed curriculum as purposeful activities which are child-centered and there's child development and growth. He introduced project method wherein teacher and student plan the activities. The progressivist aspect of this method was the constant revision of the curriculum based on student need and interest. The curriculum was developed jointly with the students. This was a core belief of Kilpatrick that students should be leaders in the development of their learning as nothing would motivate them more. This also led to the development of decision-making skills. Kilpatrick's project method is a blend of behavioral psychology and progressivism. It was behavioral in that student behavior was observed, but it was also progressive in the focus on child-centered learning. The 4 steps of project method are follows. First, purpose. Next is plan. Third is execute, and last is judge. Kilpatrick's emphasis was on learning to think and not focusing on what you think. He believed that curriculum developed social relationship and small group instruction. For Kilpatrick, education was about the social development of the child rather than cognitive development through the mastery of content. This is not saying that the mind did not matter. The curriculum should come from real life and not compartmentalized subject matter. This idea calls for a need for integrated curriculum that stressed maximum student participation. These beliefs lead to Kilpatrick to create a unique form of teaching. Harold Rugg, 1886 to 1960. His early poverty seemed to preclude his attending in college. Nevertheless, he was able to matriculate at Dartmouth College, graduated in 1908 with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and earning a graduate civil engineering degree from Dartmouth Thayer School of Civil Engineering in 1909. Rugg worked briefly as a civil engineer, then taught civil engineering at Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, where he grew interested in how students learn. This interest inspired him to gain a doctorate in education at the University of Illinois in 1915, and he began a college teaching career at the University of Chicago, where he taught until 1920. He went to Teachers College at Columbia University, where he taught until his retirement in 1951. After his retirement, he continued publishing books in education and also served as an educational consultant in Egypt and Puerto Rico. The field of education was still in its formative stages when Rugg began his career, and he proceeded to have a major impact in a number of areas. Rugg applied his training to reassessing how curriculum was created. His editing and writing in both the 22nd and 26th yearbooks of the National Society for the Study of Education provided groundbreaking synthesis of the fields of social studies and general curriculum respectively. Rugg was a co-founder of the National Council for the Social Studies and edited yearbooks for a number of respective educational organizations. Although Rugg was trained as an engineer and educational psychologist, his major initial impact was in the field of curriculum. Rugg, however, did not get very involved in the duties and tasks of such organization, instead concentrating on his own research and writing projects. He viewed curriculum as child-centered and should develop the whole child. And curriculum emphasized social studies, and the teacher should plan curriculum in advance. In 1928, Rugg co-wrote his first major work, The Child-Centered School, which described the historical and contemporary basis for child-centered education. This work had a major impact on the progressive educators and remains an excellent explanation and critique of this topic. It was one of the first treatises on the two major emphases within progressive education, child-centeredness and social reconstruction. As Rugg's career progressed, he became as much critic and discussant of contemporary American culture as an educator. He was outspoken social reconstructionist and a strong advocate of the reform programs of President Franklin Roosevelt. Hollis Caswell, 1901 to 1989. He was an American educator who became an authority on curriculum planning in schools. He directed surveys of curriculum practices in several school systems and wrote several books on the subject. He sees curriculum as organized around social functions of teams, organized knowledge, and learners' interests. He viewed that curriculum is a set of experiences and subject matter is developed around social function and learners' interest. Children work with their father and mother and with their older brother and sister. They were inducted into their responsibilities as citizens through cooperation with their elders in providing the labor necessary for many community enterprises and in actual participation in those discussions which resulted in local government action. In this earlier period, with the difficulties of transportation and communication which then existed, each family or at least each local community was the most part self-sustaining. So here, it states that Holly's casual curriculum really focuses the best of the student or the learners, and it proves here that every student should do their responsibilities, not just a learner, but a child to their parents and also a good citizen to the community. Ralph Tyler, 1902 to 1994. He is regarded as one of the foremost educators of the 20th century and is considered by many to be the grand old man of educational research. He is often associated with educational assessment and evaluation as well as curriculum theory and development. Although he wouldn't have seen himself as an instructional technologist or learning scientist, his ideas have sharply influenced our ideas. Tyler viewed that curriculum is a science and an extension of school's philosophy. It is based on student needs and interests. Tyler wrote a science test for students that revealed holes in testing methods which emphasized memory skills as opposed to understanding concepts. Curriculum is also related to instruction, and the subject matter is organized in terms of knowledge, skills, and values. Tyler believed that learning should be meaningful to the student in his community, that it should be taught through appropriately designed and organized learning experiences, and that learning should be evaluated not only to see what students are really learning, but to see what changes might need to be made to the curriculum. And lastly, curriculum is the process emphasizes problem solving and aims to educate generalists and not specialists. This time, let's have a throwback about the different period of historical foundation of curriculum in the Philippines. So these are the pre-Spanish period, Spanish devised, American period, Commonwealth, Japanese, Liberation, Philippine Third Republic, the New Society, and last but not the least, the K-12. We have here the pre-Spanish period. This happened before 1521. So in pre-Spanish period, what the barangay had been practiced, educated, and believed were passed from generation to generation. Then the curriculum was then unsystematic and it is unplanned and spontaneous because the aims of education during that time were for survival, for conformity, and for enculturation. So the type of education during this pre-Spanish was really informal because it is for only practical training and survival purposes. So they follow the code of Kalantiaw and Maragtas. They believe in Bathala and other Diyos-Diyosan and the obedience and respect our elders. Na that's our tatak as pagiging Filipino for being respectful to our elders. The medium of instruction during that time was alibata or baybayin, conducted by babaylan, or the term of it is tribal tutors. So aside from their parents, they had their tutor called babaylan. So if you watch Bagani or Amaya, maybe you can relate to that babaylan and more or less in our history subject. From 1521 to 1896, we have this, or we term this as Spanish regime or Spanish device in our country. So that is for more than 300 years. So they were in our country when Spain began to colonize Philippines. The Spanish missionaries played a major role in how early Filipinos were educated. Religion was the tool. So Spain willed to make Philippines to its colony. If you remember, when our history classes, we have these 3 Gs in colonizing our country. So we have the God, the gold, and then the glory. During this time, the curriculum was then a lot more structured. We have this structured curriculum compared to what the Filipinos had before, but the emphasis was on religion rather than basic skills for survival. So the aims of education during that time were to promote Christianity and Spanish language. The type of education was formal religious education. The medium of instruction that was used was Spanish but only fully-blooded Spanish and elite can learn Spanish language, while the Filipino students or normal Filipino students were using vernacular. So they were not taught Spanish at all. So there were discrimination to our Filipino students during in Spanish device. The beginning of American regime is after the rebel of Filipinos against Spain. America began to reign to our country. The 600 Thomasites played major role as how the early Filipinos were educated. Thomasites, there are the U.S. teachers from the United States of America who traveled to Philippines, who boarded the ship of USS Thomas. So the curriculum evolved into a more organized, systematic, and academic and skill-focused dynamism. The aims of education during that time were to teach democracy. There was a separation of state and church and establishment of public school system. In America period, they promote democratic ideas and way of life. The type of education in this regime in our country was formal, which focuses the three R's: good moral and right conduct, hygiene, sanitation, and English as medium of instruction. Talking about type of education, it has 7 years of elementary education, 4 years in primary, and 3 years for intermediate. We have also the secondary and tertiary education. The Education Act of 1901, the Philippine Normal School, or now Philippine Normal University, was founded in 1908, so the Filipino teachers can teach there. So from 1935 to 1946, when Philippines was then beginning to prepare for its independence from America, sa bisa ng Tidings McDuffie Act and expansion and reformation of the Philippine curriculum began this period. So Filipino teachers were empowered to improve the curriculum, and as a result, content rich on culture-specific courses were added because the aim of education during the Commonwealth period were to develop a moral character, to have this vocational efficiency and preparation for independence. With that, patriotism was added as an important factor in the Philippine curriculum. The type of education in Commonwealth period was formal and vocational education. That time, there were 8 regional normal schools were formed. One of it is the Cebu Normal School, now Cebu Normal University, and then elementary reduced to 6 years from 7 years, and then with the entry of 7 years old in grade 1. During Commonwealth period was compulsory, so the medium of instruction was Filipino, and the Filipino subject were introduced as well. In Commonwealth period, we put our own tatak as Filipino. So this was the time of our ama ng sariling wika, Pangulong Manuel L. Quezon, with our reformation in the educational system, preparing for independence. The growth of Philippine curriculum was stunted because of the Japanese invasion in our country that happened in 1941 to 1944. They tried to erase every influence of American in the entire society, especially in the Philippine curriculum. During the time of the Japanese, the aims of education were this one: love of labor, because Japan has strong military defense. The type of education was formal education and vocational, and the medium of instruction that was used during Japanese period was Nihongo, their national language, and English was totally abolished during that time because they were trying to really erase every American influence to the Filipinos during Japanese period. This is termed as the blackout of the Philippine education. So, why blackout? Because Philippine education, everything was revised. All the books were revised and even burned. So again, the Japanese period was termed as blackout. After the war, of course, there were distractions, and the Philippines started to rebuild again, to stand again. especially in education. So that's what we term as liberation period. Liberation period from 1944 to 1946, these 2 years, the aims of education were morality, responsibility, helping the community, and cultural heritage. The type of education was formal and vocational. This time, the medium of instruction was Filipino language. To really improve our curriculum, the researchers were conducted during Philippine Third Republic from 1946 to 1972. Research became more prevalent and it's greatly helped in the facilitating the expansion and improvement in developing curriculum. The aims of education during that time were about appreciation of culture, preservation of cultural heritage, and the use of Filipino books and literature, and of course, we have this bilingualism. So the type of education we have is formal education. The largely tradition curriculum become more colored following its progressive methodology and mindset. The medium of instruction was Filipino language and other foreign languages, especially English. From 1972, as the new society, the basic education curriculum, the aims of education during this time were to love our country, duties of citizenship, and self-discipline. The type of education is formal and vocational. Late President Marcos issued the Educational Decree of 1972, which greatly added to the development of the Philippine curriculum and heavily articulated the need to teach nationalism, patriotism, moral values, and relevant academic courses. So the medium of instruction was Filipino and English. So in this time, graduate studies were being incorporated in the curriculum. So we have here the implementation of flag ceremony or the heraldic code. So as you can see, we are constantly progressing, we are constantly developing or improving the curriculum in order as to fit in the needs of our society. As the Philippines continues to witness the result of all underpinnings, the researches, and the happenings internationally and locally, a more developed and globally competitive curriculum would naturally make itself known as K plus 12 or K-12 curriculum or the Enhanced Basic Education Program from 2012 up to the present. So the implementation of K-12 system is the product of the need to compete with internationally standards. So going back, the motives of curriculum development, the last one, the excellence in education. So we are now having this K-12 program in order for us to compete in global market, in order for us to be part with the other nationalities and with other people outside the Philippines. So now you can see our curriculum started from very end structure and now we are now having K to 12, so you can see the progress. So that is the goal of curriculum development, to have this progressive curriculum, productive and good curriculum in order to have this mass education and excellence in education as a result. So that's all for the historical foundation of curriculum. Thank you for listening and have a good night.